Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stott and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today we're going to be discussing the paradox of micronations. Now, as many of our followers will already know, Stomaria doesn't self-identify as a micronation for a wide range of reasons, but in short it's because doing so did us far more harm than good. But this hasn't stopped others from labelling Stomaria as a micronation, which is why we discuss it even to this day. And this all stems from the fact that Stomaria is looking to build an actual nation in the modern world. Whereas, somewhat conversely, the vast majority of micronations out there have absolutely no interest in doing this. And those very few that do are very rarely self-identifying as micronations themselves, and like Stomaria, simply have the label of micronation attached to them by others. So if you look at some of the most successful micronations in the world that have actually taken realistic, pragmatic, and noticeable steps towards establishing a nation on some level, like Liberland or Sealand or Asgardia or even Hutt River when it was around, none of these entities define themselves as micronations. They don't attend micronational events, they don't have mutual recognition treaties with other micronations, and so on and so forth. And even though that I might have my own views on these kinds of micronations, if you compare them to Molossia, Westarctica, Aerica, Slowjamastan, and so on and so forth, these satirical micronations, these single-issue micronations, the contrast is clear. Some of these entities have been going for more than 20 years. Some have been going longer than I have been alive. But they have expressly said, in many cases, that they have no intention of building a nation, and those that do claim to actually want to build a nation have taken virtually no steps towards this end. Instead, it's about creating laws around crocs and toilet paper. It's about using cookie dough as a medium of exchange. It's about claiming fictional planets as sovereign territory. It's about declaring war on other micronations, and so on and so forth. Absolutely none of this has anything to do with nation building, and it's of no interest to us whatsoever. And beyond the few dozen top-tier, upper echelon micronations, the old guard as I tend to call them, you have basically everyone else, which make up 99% of the micronational community. Now, there are many, many reasons as to why we don't indulge in micronationalism, and a large part of it has to do with what these kinds of micronations actually get up to. Now, you could try to pigeonhole each and every one of them, you could try to categorize them in some way, but it would take forever and would be relatively pointless in doing so. But it can be summarized relatively succinctly by saying that lots of these entities, the vast majority of them, are incredibly short-lived. They are run by children and adolescents. They typically promote some kind of extremist ideology like communism or neo-Nazism. They have a fixation on conflict and war and hostilities and are determined to create fictional dramatics with others in order to stir up some drama or justify their own existence. And they have this obsession with militarism. That, in a nutshell, is what the vast majority of micronations consist of. And I speak on this matter as an authority on some level, in the sense that I have been involved in the micronational community for many years, and the people that have been involved for many years, or even take a casual glance at the community at large, will know that what I'm saying is true. But more to the point, my involvement in the micronational community, when it was still a thing, back when it was 2022, so 2019 to 2022, we were identifying as a micronation. But even since then, we have received hundreds of communications from self-identified micronations each year up until this very day. So I can say with a great deal of certainty what the community consists of. And anyone that would deny that is free to do so, but they are simply lying to themselves. Everyone can see in the public space what the community is, and it has absolutely nothing to do with nation building. And in and amongst all this, there's perhaps 1 in every 100 micronations, and that's been very generous, that actually has the potential to take things further, to actually build a nation. And I normally identify these relatively quickly based on 3 things. So putting aside the development of the nation itself, so the culture, the values, the identity, the structure, and all of that jazz, there are 3 things that I look out for. And the first should be pretty obvious. is this nation, is this entity actually looking to build a nation? Now, this should be relatively straightforward and obvious on the face of it, but this simple statement by itself already rules out the vast majority of the micronational community. Not just some 14-year-old on Twitter declaring war on another Twitter account because they called a mean name or something like that, but also the upper echelons of the micronational community, many of which have outwardly stated how ridiculous it is to actually look towards building a nation and have zero interest in doing so. They might do it because it's satirical or a single-issue campaign or whatever else, but building a nation is not what they're interested in. And that's obviously fine on all accounts. Everyone can do whatever they want, but what we are looking for are actual nation builders, and those that have the drive, the intention, the aspiration to build a nation. That is relatively clear from the outset based on how they present themselves. And once I've identified an entity that is actually serious about bringing this about actually building a nation, the next thing I look for is the actual plan of action. Because you can have entities out there that look the part and then say by 2050 we're going to have our own cities, or we're going to buy an island and we're all going to move there, or we're going to establish a floating platform and go seasteading. I've seen it all before. It's all nonsense. It's all fantasy. What I look for are those that actually have a pragmatic and realistic plan, a step-by-step process which takes them from A to B to C. I want to see a solid plan based on realism, based on what is possible, not on what you would like to accomplish, not on some daydream fantasy that you have, but based on reality. Because to put it bluntly, these individuals, these communities, these entities that simply want to wish their nation into existence without giving any real thought into how that's going to be brought about is not going to succeed. And finally, the third thing I look for is beyond the actual desire to build a nation, beyond the plan, as good as it might be, to actually build that nation. You need the financial resources to do so. You need to have skin in the game. I have seen no end of posts and videos from people that deride the very idea that you should need financial resources to build an entire nation. And this kind of delusion is what separates the fanciful from the realistic. Stomaria is rooted in realism, and the nation builders of the world are rooted in realism. And as I said a moment ago, you can't simply wish these things into existence. You have to commit. It doesn't mean you have to be extraordinarily wealthy or a multimillionaire to bring it about. Taking small incremental steps in promoting and developing and expanding your nation is often the best course of action anyway. And if you have a realistic and pragmatic plan in place, you will have already taken into account the fact that you're not coming from a place of extraordinary wealth where things can just be brought about in an instant. Things take time, and that is exactly the route that Stomaria took. So I can see it when I actually survey the landscape. I can identify relatively quickly the kinds of entities that we would like to engage with and work with, because I have not just seen it, but I have lived it, I have experienced it, and I am a prime example, and Stomaria is a prime example of what you can actually build. When Stomaria was founded in 2019, it consisted of nothing more than a flag stood in the corner of my living room and a dozen followers on our Facebook page. We had the aspiration to not only build the nation of Stomaria, but we also wanted to build an empire where other nations and other communities could become integrated into the wider community that we were establishing in order to build each other up. And the plan was simple. We wanted, through legal and legitimate means, to attain a de facto independence by raising sufficient capital through conventional means, through employment or through the return of investments, in order to acquire land. And that land, in turn, could be utilized to generate our own energy, to supply our own water, to grow our own food, to house our own citizens, to establish our own industries, and all the while we would be utilizing our own money and establishing our own identity. And the result is that in 2021, after 2 years of building Stomaria's brand, establishing trading relations, and refining our objectives, we began the process of integrating other nations and communities into the empire, starting with Wayward, then Norwick, then Moreland, then Molossia, then Vesta, and then Branhow, we began producing our own money, which consists of pure silver, first in the form of coins, and then the far more cost-effective bars that we use today. We purchased land from Wayward to establish our first province, which we've since used to grow food, collect water, generate energy, rejuvenate soil, engage in forestry, host events, set up stalls, have people stay intermittently on the land, and more besides. And now we are actively looking towards expanding the territorial holdings of Stomaria further still. And not just Stomaria, but also Wayward and Vesta as member states of the Empire. And these new lands will be utilised further to advance our goals. And this is what it is all about. And that is why we recently announced a £100,000 budget for 2025 in order to facilitate this expansion. And it's all of this and more besides that makes Stomaria stand out from the crowd. It's why Stomaria is as popular as it is. And even though Stomaria doesn't identify as a micronation, there are plenty of micronationalists out there that do take a great deal of inspiration from us, because we have become the blueprint for many of these entities. And it is inspirational from my own perspective to know that a lot of people out there are finding value in what we are building because they can replicate it themselves. What we are doing is not rocket science, it's not complicated, but it is nevertheless a rarity. And the reason it's a rarity is, as I've made clear in this video and many other videos beforehand, micronationalism is not nation building. And the genuine nation builders of the world that might come across this video, might come across Stomaria, should take that into consideration. Because although what we are building is not always easy, and there are plenty of challenges that we have to overcome, and there are plenty of detractors that are not just hoping for Stomaria's demise, but in a lot of cases are actively working towards it. For all of that, what we are actually doing is far more rewarding than anything that the micronational experience has to offer. If you want to learn more about Stomaria or play an active role in our development and expansion, visit our website at www.stomaria.com and find out what it means to be a Stomarian.